There was once a painter, a man whose heart and soul had always been drawn to the world of color, texture, and imagination. From a young age, he had spent countless hours observing the world around him, taking in the hues of the sky at dawn, the delicate petals of a flower, and the way light played on water. He saw beauty in the minor details and deeply longed to express it on canvas. But there was a problem, an invisible wall that separated him from the very thing he loved most, painting. That problem was perfectionism. Every day, he sat before a blank canvas, brushes ready, paints mixed, but his hand remained still. His mind raced with questions. What if it's not good enough? What if I make a mistake? What if I ruin this beautiful blank canvas? The fear of imperfection held him captive, paralyzing his creativity and silencing the voice within him that longed to express itself. And so, the canvas remained blank. This is the story of how one artist learned to overcome his fear of imperfection and, in doing so, discovered the true meaning of self-expression. It's a story not just about art but about life, about breaking free from the chains of self-doubt and learning to embrace the beauty of the imperfect. The fear of the blank canvas. The painter, Lucas, was known as a talented artist in his town. People admired his earlier works, pieces filled with life, emotion, and depth. But over time, something began to shift in Lucas. The more recognition he received, the more pressure he felt to create something even better with each new painting. What had once been a source of joy became a burden, and the once flowing creativity now seemed like a distant memory. The blank canvas before him symbolized his growing fear that whatever he painted wouldn't measure up to the high expectations he had set for himself. Every day, he would stand in his studio, staring at the canvas, with the brushes in hand, but he couldn't bring himself to make the first stroke. He would tell himself, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll start. Tomorrow, I'll find the perfect idea. But tomorrow came and went, and still, the canvas remained untouched. His mind became a battlefield, filled with critical voices, some from himself and some from imagined critics who would judge his work harshly. The fear of not being perfect became so overwhelming that it stopped him from painting altogether. The studio, once his sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The search for perfection. Lucas wasn't alone in his struggle. Many artists, creators, and dreamers face the same battle. The pursuit of perfection can be both a motivator and a curse. At its best, it pushes us to improve, to refine our skills, and to produce work of excellent quality. But at its worst, it paralyzes us, convincing us that anything less than flawless is worthless. For Lucas, the latter had taken hold. He would spend hours analyzing the works of great painters, Michelangelo, Van Gogh, Monet, wondering how they had created such masterpieces. He studied their techniques, use of color, and brushstrokes, hoping to find the secret to their greatness. But instead of inspiring him, it only deepened his sense of inadequacy. How can I ever compare to them? He would think. What if I try and fail? The fear of failure became his constant companion. He convinced himself that he wasn't ready and needed more time to perfect his ideas before committing them to the canvas. And so, he waited, and the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. All the while, the blank canvas stood as a reminder of his inaction, a reminder that he was letting his fear dictate his life. A flicker of hope. One evening, after another day of staring at the canvas in frustration, Lucas decided to walk through the park near his home. He hoped that being surrounded by nature, by the sights and sounds that had once inspired him, might reignite the spark of creativity he so desperately needed. Walking along the path, he noticed a young girl sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her pencil moving swiftly across the paper. Intrigued, Lucas approached her and watched from a distance as she worked. The girl seemed wholly absorbed in her drawing, her hand moving without hesitation. She wasn't worried about making mistakes or perfecting everything, she simply enjoyed creating. Suddenly, the girl looked up and saw Lucas watching her. She smiled and held up her sketchpad. "Do you like it?" she asked. The question took Lucas aback. The drawing was far from perfect, her lines were shaky, the proportions were off, and the shading was rough. But there was something about it that made him smile. It was full of life and the joy and energy of someone creating from the heart. "It's wonderful," Lucas replied honestly. The girl beamed with pride and returned to her drawing, her confidence unshaken by any imperfections in her work. As Lucas walked away, something clicked inside him. The girl's fearless approach to drawing, her willingness to create without worrying about perfection, reminded him of something he had long forgotten, that art wasn't about being perfect. It was about expressing oneself, capturing a moment, feeling, and thought. It was about creating something that came from the heart. The first stroke the following day, Lucas stood in front of the blank canvas again. But this time, something was different. The fear was still there, but it was quieter now, less overwhelming. He thought about the young girl in the park and how free she had seemed as she sketched. She wasn't worried about creating a masterpiece, she was enjoying creating. Taking a deep breath, Lucas dipped his brush into the paint. His hand hovered over the canvas for a moment, and then, without overthinking it, he made the first stroke. It wasn't perfect, far from it. The line wavered slightly, and the color wasn't exactly what he had envisioned. But it was a start. He stepped back and looked at the stroke he had made. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the first mark on the canvas, which felt like a victory. He picked up his brush again and added another stroke, then another, and another. The more he painted, the less he worried about perfection. He let the colors flow freely, mixing and blending in ways he hadn't planned. Shapes began to form, and the painting started to take on a life of its own. For the first time in a long while, Lucas felt the joy of painting return. He wasn't trying to create something perfect, he was allowing himself to paint, to express whatever came to him in the moment. And in doing so, he realized that the beauty of art wasn't in its perfection but in its honesty. The beauty of imperfection. As Lucas continued to paint, he saw the canvas in a new light. It was no longer a symbol of his fear but a playground for his creativity. Each brushstroke, color, and shape reflected who he was at that moment, not perfect, but accurate. He found that the more he let go of the need for perfection, the more beautiful his work became. The painting wasn't flawless, but it had character. The colors didn't always blend perfectly, but they had life. The lines weren't always straight, but they told a story. And that story was his. The more Lucas painted, the more he realized that art reflected life as messy, unpredictable, and full of mistakes and imperfections. But those imperfections made it beautiful. No masterpiece had ever been created without trial and error, risks, and the willingness to fail. Lucas returned to the canvas with a newfound sense of freedom as the days passed. He wasn't painting for anyone else, not for critics, fame, or approval. He was painting for himself, for the sheer joy of creating. And in that joy, he found his voice again. The power of vulnerability. Through his journey, Lucas learned an important lesson, that vulnerability is at the heart of true creativity. To create something meaningful, whether a painting, a piece of music, or a story, one must be willing to be vulnerable, to open oneself up to the possibility of failure, risk making mistakes, and embrace the imperfections that come with being human. Perfectionism, he realized, was a shield, a way to protect himself from the fear of being judged, of not measuring up. But that shield had also kept him from experiencing the very thing he loved most, painting from the heart. By allowing himself to be vulnerable, Lucas was able to create authentic work that spoke to him and, ultimately, to others. His paintings became more than just images on a canvas, they became expressions of his inner world, full of emotion, depth, and life. And something remarkable happened. The more he embraced imperfection, the more people connected with his art. They saw the honesty in his work, the raw emotion, the willingness to be imperfect. His paintings resonated with them because they, too, were imperfect. Lucas realized that by trying to be perfect, he had been holding himself back from genuinely connecting with others. But by being vulnerable and showing his true self through his art, he found a way to reach people on a deeper level. Painting from the heart. In time, Lucas became known not just for his technical skill but also for the emotional depth of his work. His paintings were no longer about precision or perfection, they were about telling a story, capturing a feeling, and expressing the inexpressible. He learned to trust his instincts, follow the paint's flow, and embrace the unexpected twists and turns that came with each new canvas. Some paintings were better than others, but that no longer mattered to him. What mattered was that he was painting from the heart. One day, as Lucas stood before a new canvas, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The fear that had once gripped him so tightly was now a distant memory. He was no longer worried about making mistakes or creating something perfect. Instead, he simply picked up his brush, dipped it in the paint, and began to create. And as the colors flowed across the canvas, Lucas smiled. For he had finally learned the most important lesson: true art, and true life, is not about being perfect but about being true to oneself. It's about letting go of the fear of judgment, the need for approval, and the desire for perfection. It's about embracing the beauty of imperfection and trusting that, in the end, what we create from the heart will always be enough. So, Lucas, the painter, found his way back to the joy of creation, not by chasing perfection but by learning to embrace the beauty of the imperfect. His story reminds us that the greatest masterpiece we can create is the one that comes from the heart, flawed, messy, and gloriously real. So, whether you're an artist, a writer, a dreamer, or someone trying to find your way, remember this: it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, creating from the heart, and letting the world see who you truly are. And in that, you will find the true beauty of self-expression. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt held back by perfectionism or fear, remember that you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know how you overcome your own creative struggles. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of inspiration, creativity, and self-discovery. And always remember, create from the heart because that's where the true magic lies. Thank you for watching, and keep painting your own masterpiece, one imperfect stroke